You've got that, all you need is a $10 scale, and you could throw away all those I have at least 3 sets of cups and quarter cups and half cups, and teaspoons and tablespoons, and you just get rid of all that stuff. You'll actually save yourself time and money in the kitchen. What the heck is, you want a scale? What the heck is 3/4 of a cup? Okay? And it's just because we don't use scales in our kitchen that we don't realize how much easier it is to use those. And the other example I like to use is onions, okay? If I chop my onion up really fine, I'm going to get a lot in that cup. If I chop my onions really big, I'm going to end up with less. I could theoretically weigh out, it's actually mass, do my mass of my onion, and no matter how big or small I cut it, I'll end up with the same amount of onion in my recipe every time. And it's less of an issue for like pot roast and stuff like that. But when you're baking, sometimes those little things can make a big difference. And there actually are recipes that you can find on the internet that will give you all the ingredients in the metric system. And I actually have a couple cookbooks that have the ingredients down the center and then have metric units on one side and U.S. customary units on the other.
But you can easily confuse volume with mass.
And, well, volume...
Water density, you're going to be off.
Well, but mass is mass is mass, and that's another...
A cup is a volume.
Right, right.
I'm going to weigh it, well, it better be the density of water, or you're going to be off.
Well, it's very interesting because I was going back and looking at some of the stuff that was coming out in the 70s when we were doing the conversions, and a lot of foodstuffs have a lot of water in them because when you were looking at the milliliters, it joined up really well. It was really interesting to see that. The other thing that I think we had a couple problems with back in the 70s was I looked at some of the conversion materials to get people to move, and they looked like they were all written for like 12-year-olds. And so I think there was a real lack of sophistication in how people could learn this stuff. The other thing is that people said, we kept trying to teach conversions, and I actually have this thing that was almost like a slide rule. No, just stop using the old units, start using the new units, and don't worry about conversions. And then somebody said to me, oh, but cookbooks, it's going to be so hard because of all my cookbooks. You do not use every recipe in every cookbook you have. Okay? There's a few that you depend on, and once you've made those conversions, you only have to do it once. I actually did a conversion for a cookie that when I put it out so that it cooks evenly, I actually use my scale and I know roughly how many grams that needs to be. And then that way, all my cookies bake at exactly the same rate because they're within the same size. And the other thing is grams. A gram is roughly a paper clip. Okay, I can imagine a paper clip. I can't have a lot harder trouble imagining 1/28th of an ounce. Okay, which is what a gram is. And I actually wrote about this a couple of months ago, is the fact that if you go the top 10 Google searches, 2 of them relate to our weights and measures. How many ounces are there in a pound? So think about how I actually computed that if you spent so many seconds looking this up, multiply it by, the number of people, we're wasting incredible amounts of time by going back and forth with this thing. Like I said, I could talk and talk.
I kind of think you're trivializing how easy the transition would be. I mean, you've used relatively trivial examples with like cookbooks and things, but some of these requirements extend to laws, for example, like EPA requirements. You can't just simply quit using those old units. You're still going to have to convert. So like the question I have is, what's a successful transition plan really look like? It's not. It can't be to stop using those old units. Well,
it's easier than you think, and you don't have to go back on real estate records for 100 years. Okay, probably the country that has done the most efficient was Australia. They had an unbelievably nice, and I have to give a shout out. This is actually an Australian opal that was sent to me by Peter Goodyear, who's actually my contact down in Australia, and he grew up in England and then moved. And you almost cannot find an imperial unit there anymore. And their buildings all really precise. Yeah, I'm not saying there won't be some conversion things. And it's really interesting because change management is something that's in my background. And there was a study that found that even the most kind of social upheaval thing, within 6 months it's packed. And it probably took me about 6 months to get used to Celsius. And to me, that was the toughest thing to get used to. Because all the other units were late, but all of a sudden I'm working in these standards that I didn't understand. I changed my app on my phone to Celsius. And within 6 months, it was old hat. So yeah, it would take some effort, but I'd still say if 95% of the world has figured out how to do this, we could apply American know-how. A weird story that I like to trot out that's kind of sad is that if you go onto Twitter right now and you type in metric system, the #1 hit you will get is, if it wasn't for illegal drugs, I wouldn't know the metric system. And the reason for that is obvious. Illegal drugs is international trade. International trade is the metric system. I saw some other hands. I can't believe I answered everybody's question.
That leads to a good way to get rid of drugs.
It hasn't stopped them. Our kids have figured it out.
When did Australia convert?
This is the list. The last country that converted was Jamaica. Man. And that was back in 1998. This is a long list.
Did Canada convert, or were they always metric?
Well, nobody could have been always metric. So actually, Canada and the UK are what are called soft adoption countries, and that they still use things side by side. What's really weird that we get into, and I've seen it on labels here too, is they'll have milliliters, and then quarts, and ounces. So we're actually putting 3 different measures on these things when we really only need one. So the thing with soft adoption countries is that I actually interviewed the head of the UK Metric Association, and I said, why don't you guys fully use the metric system? And his response to me was, because you don't. So chances are good if we converted over, the rest of the world would.
But we're the big enchilada, you know, and so we've got.
We're not 95% of the world.
Well, we think we are.
We do think we
And
are.
I think that's why there's that resistance. Why should we change? Let
Yeah.
everybody else go to U.S. system.
Well, and people have said that to me, and it's this whole idea of American exceptionalism, that we're special. But you know what? I have to tell you, if we think we're the greatest and we're always going to be, at one point, the UK had 20%. 20% of the world was under British rule. They're not now. Every empire that there has ever been has fallen. And in fact, the rest of the world is now looking at China as the world economic leader. We are no longer viewed as a world economic leader. But my main point, and people say, well, so do you want us to convert over? Yeah, I think it's a good idea, but my real effort is to get the discussion back on the table and make a conscious decision about whether or not we want to continue on the trajectory. It was really interesting because one of these reports I have back here is a report that was done in preparation for the 75 attempt at conversion. And it's called A History of the Controversy of the Metric System in the United States. 300 pages without the appendices. And the report that actually came out urging for this legislation is called The Metric System, Whose Time Has Come. We're not buying ourselves anything by dragging our feet on it anymore. We're hurting our kids, we're wasting our kids' time. I wouldn't want to waste a year and a half of our kids' time in school when they could be doing other things. And let's face it, our math and science scores are nothing to write home about. And it's not that our math and science scores are going down, they're just staying level, but other countries are just beating us. And I can guarantee you, every country, and I'm trivializing, every country that's beaten us, they use the metric system. Now, is there a one-to-one correlation? There might be, if to the extent that we're wasting our kids' time in school.